Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance Network, and today we're going to talk about the book Magnetobiology, which I recently asked for anybody who could find it to send to me, and you guys are awesome, and you did. Actually, about probably 10 of you guys emailed me copies of the PDF that you found different ways. And also, I want to say that some of you have sent me a link to a website. Let me see if I can pull it up off the top of my head. Sci-Hub, something like this. And we're searching DuckDuckGo, of course. And I believe that this is a way to get lots of papers and journals and things for free, because in a recent video covering 5G and 60 gigahertz, I showed you how I had to pay for getting access to a journal so that I could go over the study for you guys. And I think it cost me $60 or something along those lines. So not only did some of you send me the actual study, which I'm very grateful for, and we're going to go over some of that today, or send me the actual book, Magnetobiology, but many of you sent me this link to Sci-Hub, where you can actually put in the address to a study that you're trying to get, and in most cases, it will give it to you for free. So this is pretty cool. We'll put this link in the description below as well, and thanks to everybody who sent this to me. Several of you did, and I very much appreciate that. So again, the website that you want to bookmark is theconsciousresistance.com. Our documentary, The 5G Trojan Horse, just came out 2 months ago, and we're nearing 100,000 views on it. We would love some more views so we can get more people asking the right questions about 5G. And in a previous video, as I said, I talked about this whole 60 gigahertz debate about whether or not 60 gigahertz could be affecting people's oxygen uptake and affect hemoglobin in the blood, and if that could be tied into what they're calling COVID-19. We went over some interesting studies actually showing that COVID-19 is apparently affecting the blood, and that it might in fact be a blood disease, not a lung disease, like not a respiratory disease, and that it does seem to be affecting people's oxygen uptake in some way. It was described by at least one doctor as like people being up in high elevation and just not being able to get enough oxygen. So we covered that. I went through a number of different studies looking at 60 gigahertz. I also went through some of the claims made by Dana Ashley, and I guess now this guy Fullerton Informer is one of the people talking about 60 gigahertz. And look, guys, let me be clear that it's clear that 5G, cell phones, Wi-Fi, all these various parts of the electromagnetic spectrum that are associated with radio waves and microwaves, that they do have an effect on the body. There's no doubt about that. And I looked at this study here, evaluation. So I even looked at the study evaluation of the potential biological effects of the 60 gigahertz millimeter waves upon human cells. And again, I recommend you go back and watch this video if you haven't seen it yet, where I dive deeper into the 60 gigahertz 5G, the whole potential COVID-19 question. But the focus of today's video is, again, Magnetobiology, which is this book here that I asked if anybody could find the PDF, a free version of it, instead of the $200, $300 version on Amazon and elsewhere on the internet, to send me a copy. And many of you did, and I'm thankful for that. I also told you that I emailed the author, the Russian author, about an interview. I haven't heard back from him. But hopefully we will, and we can actually speak to the person who wrote the book about what he's proposing and, you know, everything that he has inside of it. So with Magnetobiology, it came out in 2002, and it's like a big textbook that explores the biology, the chemistry, the physics, and you can see here's the table of contents, introduction, overview of experimental findings, theoretical models, interference of bound ions, prospects of electro and magnetobiology, and then they have an addendum at the end. So again, using Sci-Hub, some people were able to get the book and send it to me, and here it is. So today, this is only a preliminary look at this. I'm not going to do a full video review of this just yet because I haven't read it. It's about 400 pages, and I haven't had time to dive in just yet. 478, including the appendix and everything in there. But what we're going to do is just search some key terms like 60 gigahertz to see if these actually pop up. And because remember that one of the first viral videos going around claiming this was Dana Ashley's video that eventually got taken down by YouTube, trying to make this 60 gigahertz claim about Wuhan, China, and it got over, like I said, millions of views, lots of people now repeating, hey, 60 gigahertz, 60 gigahertz, 60 gigahertz. And she specifically mentioned this book and said, you know, Magnetobiology talks about this, and said she was trying to get a copy of it. And I'm sure if my listeners sent her a copy, that some of her listeners sent her a copy. So we're going to actually look through, just search some keywords like 60 gigahertz, oxygen, hemoglobin, and a couple others to see if this book mentions anything at all about what she is describing. And again, I'm just kind of clicking around using keywords, so I need to read the full book to get a full understanding. But from what I can see, it's clearly discussing the problems affected with electromagnetics, electromagnetic radiation, radio frequency radiation, and the exposure to human beings and how it affects our biology and our cells. Like, that's clear. That's what the book is about, and it does a great job of bringing all this information together in a very academic way. But we don't know for certain that it's making the claims Dana Ashley has been making, and others. People keep bringing up the 60 gigahertz. And like I said, just so I have to reiterate in case anybody says I'm trying to say 5G is safe or EMFs are safe, no, not at all. Part of the 5G spectrum, which is now opening up in the United States and elsewhere, does include 60 gigahertz. And there are some Wi-Fi, what I talked about last time, WiGig, using 60 gigahertz already, like Facebook's project and others that are out there. And we haven't seen those areas associated with high cases of what they're calling COVID-19. So my point is that when you actually look at this theory, we're not really finding a lot of evidence. Anyways, let's look at magnetobiology and let's see if it backs up anything of what Dana Ashley and others have said, because many people keep talking about this book. I don't know how many people have actually read it, but let's take a look. So when I search 60 gigahertz, there's literally one mention in the entire book. Just one single mention. And it's not even specific to 60 gigahertz. As you can see here, it's part of another paragraph saying that these two researchers studied the frequency dependence of microwave effect on coli cells, talking about them measuring it, and it says about 30 effective frequencies were found in the range of 40 to 60 gigahertz. A spectral peak found at 41.268 gigahertz was about 1 megahertz wide. And we go back a little further to try to get some context. It said that the researcher Webb found that lambda prophage synthesis in colibacillus cells conditioned by an unmodulated electromagnetic field was strongly dependent on field frequency and power density and on the oxygen content in the medium. So there's the word oxygen again. So it doesn't specifically say anything, at least not in very clear, direct language, about 60 gigahertz effectiveness. It's saying that they are studying this range and they found 30 effective frequencies in the range of 40 to 60 gigahertz. So that does show, like I've said, that there are effects with those frequencies. Grundler and Kyleman, 1983, and another study observed resonance peaks of yeast cell growth at 41.7 gigahertz, a frequency spectrum of microwave effect on the growth of S. cerevisiae cells in the range of 41.65 and 41.38 was obtained by these researchers. And then they go on, but again, no other mention of 60 gigahertz. We can even just search the word 60, or let's take away the space and just put 60 gigahertz like that. Nothing still showing. Let's just get rid of the gigahertz and just say 60. What do we find? We see, wow, we got like 60 examples of the words, the letters 60, but you can see 1960s, they're not 60 hertz, that's one. 6,000, 600 contributions, 60 to 95% water. Let's go back and read that water one. Biological tissue is 60 to 95% water. It possesses a relatively high permittivity for quasi-static electric field. Therefore, in an external electric field, an ion in biological tissue has acting on it a field that is times smaller. Thus, the estimate, and there's the equation for that particular part of the book. 60 hertz. 60 hertz fields. So we're not finding any specific mentions of 60 gigahertz, which again is what I'm trying to do here. This book actually has lots of other relevant information, as I'm going to show in a moment, but we're just trying to focus on the information that was being put forth by the Fullerton Informer, and specifically by Dana Ashley, because she's the one who mentioned this book, and many of you have mentioned the book as well. So I want to see if what you're claiming is true. 60 hertz, 60%, 60%, 60 hertz electric field. So nothing to 60 gigahertz, which is again is the goal of what we're looking for. Let's check out oxygen. Let's search the word oxygen. How many times is oxygen used? Concentration of peroxide lipid oxygenation products and a total of total thiol groups. We got 28 examples of oxygen. Calcium ions in the water form hexo-agua complexes with octahedral coordination of water molecules in relation to oxygen atoms. See if there's anything. A magnetic frequency shifts in equilibrium so that more free calcium gets bound into complexes to influence the biological signalization. The results of the studies of low frequency spectra of water electroconductivity to look into the stable water molecule associates that possess a memory of electromagnetic exposure. Okay, so all of this is really interesting. I'm excited to read this book, but I'm trying to stick to our goal here, which is to find anything about oxygen being so the claim was that 60 gigahertz specifically affects the oxygen, and we know that it does affect the oxygen thinning in the atmosphere, but I haven't seen anything that specifically said the oxygen in the body. And the idea being that if it's thinning the oxygen molecules, Dana, Ashley, and others claim that it's spinning the oxygen atoms on, or the electrons on the oxygen molecule, and it is affecting uptake by the hemoglobin, which is basically keeping people from being able to breathe, and thus you see what you're seeing with COVID-19. Now, what I'm trying to understand, though, is the people who are proclaiming this theory, they tend to go back and forth between this is not real, or it's worse than we're being told, but it's 5G, and it's because of 60 gigahertz. So I don't know if they've made up their mind yet, but this doesn't say anything about that specifically. The oxygen atom sits at the apexes and centers of cube edges deformed into a smear. Such a cavity is capable of retaining hydrogen atoms without forming chemical bonds. And again, guys, I'm not trying to claim that there's nothing else in this book. I'm just showing you we're doing keyword searches as I look through it and prepare to read it to see if there's anything that can stand up to what has been proposed. The structure of high-affinity cavities is shown in Figure 4.3. Ligands are arranged in a nearly octahedral manner. Interligand spacing, calcium and oxygen atoms and ligands. So let's search again. Okay, down here it says our ion radii for calcium and oxygen atoms. Okay, in this, now here we go, this is interesting. It says, in this form, iron occurs in hemo and myoglobins and cytochromes, which are responsible for oxygen transport in the organism. Now here we go. This might be some evidence of what has been claimed. Let's go back a little bit. It says, iron enters the composition of the porphyrin group and forms a heme or hemin. In this form, iron occurs in hemo and myoglobins and cytochromes, which are responsible for oxygen transport in the organism. A heme is available in the catalase and peroxidase, which control the level of hydrogen peroxide in the blood. From 1 to several dozen iron which hinder replication are contained in a DNA molecule. Transferrin is a protein that transports iron in the organism. So, let's see if let's go back. I want to see that because that looks like the most interesting part that actually mentions hemoglobin there. Trying to see if it starts talking, if it's just talking about the cell behavior or if it's describing a specific reaction as in response to some sort of electromagnetic stimuli. Several dozen copper-containing proteins and enzymes are known. Albumin, I'm not going to try to pronounce all these. In plants, copper is involved in the formation of chlorophyll. Okay, so it kind of stops there. It mentions hemoglobin, but doesn't go any further than that. It just kind of says what we already know, which is that iron is involved with hemoglobin and oxygen, and those that's what the whole point of what we're looking here for. All right, well, let's continue. Okay, it was speculated that these changes might be due to a gas transfer at the surface, specifically to a change in dissolved oxygen induced by microwave irradiation. Okay, this could be another important piece of the puzzle. In the last case, the conditioned solution was moved to replace an identical unconditioned solution in the system to observe how channel activities change within a few minutes. Changes were the case as in the case of a direct system exposure. The changed state of the solution persisted for as long as 20 minutes. The effects of microwaves on the state of ion channels was attributed, at least partially, to changed properties of solutions. It was speculated that these changes might be due to a gas transfer at the surface of solutions, specifically to a change in dissolved oxygen induced by microwave irradiation. Indeed, Kazachenko in 1999 found that microwave radiation at this frequency, power density, and the above time of exposure reduced the concentration of oxygen dissolved in water and weak brines approximately 1 to 3%. Frequency. The authors concluded that microwave radiation can affect the macrostructure of water set by impurities. All right, so this is all interesting things about how the body is affected by microwaves, radio waves, electromagnetic radiation. Okay, this study demonstrated that compared to water taken from the anode, the so-called reduced water taken at the cathode of an electrolysis unit is characterized by higher pH, lower dissolved oxygen. Okay, let's go back. We're looking at a chart now here. It says relaxation of metastable states and memory of water. This book sounds extremely interesting. It's talking about memories of water, oxygenation of water right there. Of course, we are made up of water as human beings, so we are going to be affected by these, basically these environmental toxins is what they are, exposure to non-native EMFs. For example, Liu studied a spectral band of 81 centimeters assigned to certain oscillations of a water pentamer, a ring cluster of 5 water molecules held together by hydrogen bonds so that oxygen atoms are approximately all in one place. Alright, we're about halfway through looking up oxygen, guys, and we have one other word that we look through. And again, this is coming from Magnetobiology. The book Magnetobiology, which sounds like I'm going to have to brush up on a lot of my science to really be able to take a deep understanding of, but that's also why I'm hoping to actually interview the author so he can give us a breakdown, so that those of us like myself who are laymen in this area and who, as a journalist and a researcher, I can dive deep into concepts and try to understand it. But it's definitely helpful to have somebody who lives and breathes the topic to explain it to you and to explain it to the audience. So we'll hope for that. But in the meantime, we're searching for any connection to the theory about oxygen uptake being affected by 60 gigahertz specifically, which was what was proposed and what has been repeated all over the internet. Defects of water structure, the structural organization of oxygen and hydrogen atoms, and the network of hydrogen bonds is described by the Bernal-Fowler rules, which define that every atom of oxygen has 2 hydrogen neighbors. Okay, dissociation of water. Let's continue on. Okay, it should be obvious that the relaxation of a metastable state of water taken from the electrolytic cell is utterly hampered, since it can occur only due to gas transfer on the water surface. Under normal conditions, the partial pressures of atmospheric oxygen and hydrogen differ substantially. Therefore, the this is not related to what we're looking for, but it might be interesting, and I'm definitely looking forward to getting back into this. I know I keep saying that, but it's just like pieces of this book that I want to keep diving into, but for the purpose of this video, we're just going to focus on this one topic. I'm still not seeing anything that relates to the specific claims that we're trying to prove or disprove here. It is interesting to note that the hypothesis of non-stoichiometric water can be tested experimentally. Talks about isotopes of oxygen. This quantity should be proportional to a ratio of hydrogen and oxygen nuclei in water, with a proportionality coefficient depending on the spectrometer alone. Let's see. Dissolving in water, other molecules that consist of oxygen and hydrogen only, molecular gases or hydrogen peroxide, virtually does not disturb its stoichiometry or disturbs it slowly. Molecular covalent bonds, which are far more stronger than hydrogen bonds, can be broken by an appropriate heating of such solution or in long storage. Alright, so nothing specific. After sufficient treatment of cathodic liquor, alkali reaction, a reduced concentration of dissolved oxygen. Again, I totally understand for those who might be saying, like, you're just skipping around, you got to understand the context to understand if it says what is being claimed. I get that, but we're looking for any kind of clues that this is even somewhat relative. And from what I'm seeing, like I said, I already searched 60 gigahertz. We're searching oxygen. We're going to search hemoglobin. It doesn't really seem to be pointing in the direction of proving what has been claimed, with the understanding that it's clear that EMR does affect the body. Webb found that lambda prophage synthesis in solibacillus cells conditioned by an unmodulated field, I think we almost read this one, was strongly dependent on field frequency and power density and on the oxygen content in the medium. Okay, they measured. So these are all describing different experiments on the body and on the cells in relation to radiation. We've got one here from a study, electrolyzed reduced water scavenges active oxygen species and protects DNA from oxidative damage. And then we're back to the beginning here. So that's oxygen, that's 60 gigahertz. Let's search hemoglobin. We got one hemocytometer. Doesn't really look to be relative. We'll go. Now we got 8 examples of the word hemoglobin in here. It says correlations were found of the geomagnetic perturbations with a decrease in morphine effect in mice. Okay, this is nothing. Okay, of a change in the direction of interplanetary microwave magnetic frequencies with leucite and hemoglobin content and mouse blood. So describing mouse blood. arrhythmia. Okay, doesn't say anything specific. Go to the next one, hemo, and this is where we're at. In this form, iron occurs in hemo and myoglobins and cytochromes. We read through that. That part seems interesting. Then it mentions hemoglobin here. Frequency selective action of microwaves has been observed on both living systems and proteins in vitro. This researcher in 1975 and 1978 pointed out that microwave exposure changed the state of the iron ion in the heme of the hemoglobin oxyform, HB. Mossbauer spectra iron isotope suggested that a part of iron ions in hemoglobin changed from the low spin state to the high spin. The effect was frequency selective and changed sign depending on frequency, indicating a non-thermal mechanism of microwave action. Now that right there is probably the closest to the claim that we have come at all in this way too long video. Let's see, because it describes iron ions in hemoglobin changing from low spin to high spin, and this effect was based on the frequency and changed sign depending on frequency, indicating a non-thermal, which means this is not heating, mechanism of microwave action, which is saying, again, there might be effects to your body that are not thermal and have nothing to do with heating. These findings were proved by Didenko by measuring the width of a resonant signal at 42.173 gigahertz. Okay, the Mossbauer spectral parameters changed by about 15%. After an hour of exposure to microwaves, the effect persisted for several hours. Several effective frequencies were determined with generally different qualitative effects. The difference indicates that different microwave frequencies may have different endpoint targets in a macromolecule. So they're definitely talking about the effect on the body. And right here it says Webb found that lambda prophage synthesis. This is what we were just reading. On the oxygen content in the medium. Let's continue. Study the frequency dependence of microwave effect on coli cells. These guys observed resonance peaks of yeast cell growth at 41.7. So there's definitely clear signs of effect, but none of these mention 60 gigahertz at all. Let's just make that clear. But there's at least a couple of good examples we've gone over now that do sound pretty interesting, that they might have to, they're suggesting hemoglobin going from a low spin state to a high spin state. Now, how that affects the oxygen uptake in the hemoglobin still needs to be found as far as this book, or found elsewhere if it's reported. Iron-enriched polycrystalline rabbit hemoglobin. The gun diode generator frequency was 42346.70 megahertz. With a frequency stability, a power window was found in the range. Okay, let's see if this is related to this. E. coli genome for a certain density of cell suspension when the radiation intensity was varied. It is instructive to note that this effect was absent in high radiation intensities. The literature abounds in hypotheses on the physical nature of microwave biological effects. However, notwithstanding the microwave quanta are only 1 to 3 orders of magnitude weaker than, who knows that symbol? Let me know. No unambiguously established and physical community recognized mechanisms of this action have been reported. By way of example, some ideas exercised to explain this action are presented below. Let's continue on looking up hemoglobin, and we go down for a possible mechanism of microwave impact on hemoglobin. Chernovsky, 1973, assumed microwaves excite oscillations in the protein, which are accumulated as an elastic deformation of a unified generalized degree of freedom that involves the whole protein machine concept. Its natural frequency is estimated at around 100 gigahertz. The changed state of the protein entails a biological response. Another researcher in 1979 suggested that microwaves act on rotational states of molecular segments such as OH groups and amino acid radicals, which might be a probable explanation of a sharp resonance effect of microwaves in biological systems. These authors also briefly review earlier models of microwave biological mechanisms. Specifically, they address mechanical forces which occur in an inhomogeneous medium immersed in a non-uniform electromagnetic field wherein no frequency selectivity is present. Mechanisms of direct microwave action on dipole resonators are hardly viable because the oscillations strongly attenuate and cannot accumulate a substantial energy. An electromagnetic field, we're going into more equations here that are over my head. I mean, they're mentioning some important things here. They're definitely talking about hemoglobin. They're definitely talking about oxygen. So we have this table here: resonance peaks of biological effects of microwaves, induction of prophage and E. coli cells. So they're describing different things: the resonance peaks of biological effects of microwaves and what happens in response to them. They don't list 60 gigahertz on here. They have 1, which is 70, 2, which is 41, 46 is about as 70, I guess, 51, yeah, 51 right here. This would be as close to 60 as possible, and that says with 7 at 51, state of the cell genome of E. coli. So they're describing just the different effects that go on there. And again, we need to get an interview with the author of this, and I will do my best to continue reading this and get down into it. Here's also a reference to a study we might be able to look up: effect of low-intensity millimeter waves on gamma resonance spectra of hemoglobin from 1975. Again, effect of low-intensity millimeter waves on gamma resonance spectra of hemoglobin. I'm just going to make sure we have that down, and we could probably go into that Sci-Hub we were talking about earlier and try to see if it's available. All right, guys, we're almost done. We've got a couple more hemoglobin searches to do. Hemoglobin, here's another study: resonance response of a hemoglobin molecule as a function of millimeter wave intensity. Now, those sounds very specific to studies looking at millimeter waves, which is what 5G is operating on, and the effect on the hemoglobin molecule. And so if there's some effect on the oxygen uptake, you would imagine those studies would describe it. Mossbar spectra of the hemoglobin interaction with the electromagnetic fields, resonance frequency bandwidth, and one more. Okay, that's chemotherapy. And then the last thing I want to search is just the word conclusions to see if the author or any of the researchers at any point concluded or came to some conclusions. Let's see, concluded. Let's search the word concluded. We get 4 examples. And they're describing in one study here, it says it was concluded that a strong magnetic frequency and a magnetic vacuum might have different targets in plants and different mechanisms of biological action. Interesting. Concluded in parallel fields, no effects were captured at 45 hertz, and the authors concluded that therefore a DC MF component normal to the AC field was an essential factor. There's another experiment. It was concluded that there is probably a delay in the early regeneration stage before proliferation and differentiation processes set in. Let's look at the next one. In this study, it was concluded that their data point, okay, so it's in related DNA replication. The authors concluded that the AC electrical field, so that's not about what we're looking for. The authors concluded that microwave radiation can affect the macrostructure of water set by impurities. We saw that. And it was concluded that quantum transitions with helical selection rules were involved in the biological reception of microwaves. Now let's just look up conclusions and see what we come up with. I think there's at least a couple. We have, however, in this specific case, conclusions boil down mainly to stating that angular momentum conservation low, which holds independently. Therefore, the conclusions of this section are equally applicable in the range of very low microwave intensities, where biological effects are also observed. In this case, the radio frequency radiation can adequately be described by the helicity of electromagnetic quanta, specifically the quantum number ±1, characterizing the projection of the photon spin on its momentum. There's the talk of spin again. The U.S. National Academy, striving to arrive at some final conclusion on this question, established an ad hoc commission. They're talking about the history of studying electromagnetic frequencies. Even the members of the commission had different opinions on the report's conclusion. According to the report, low-frequency magnetic frequencies can cause cancer in men. There's also another conclusion that animal studies do not support cancer risks. So that's from 2000. Okay, in that case, I don't think this is what we're looking for, guys. I mean, it's just talking about the conclusions all around. I think I've done a reasonable job of searching this whole book for 60 gigahertz, for hemoglobin, for oxygen. And again, this is a preliminary look, so please do not comment saying, dude, you didn't actually read the book yet. I've clearly stated that over and over. I'm in the process of reading the book, but I wanted to say thank you to everybody who has sent me the book, and to everybody who is out there trying to get to the bottom of this information and actually cares about getting to the bottom, not just making assumptions about 60 gigahertz or 5G or anything, because I want to make it clear, I've never said that 60 gigahertz is safe or something along those lines. All I've said is that we need the actual data to prove it. We need to have the studies and have the evidence before we go around just touting that and, telling people to look at this content and please see what we're seeing when we don't have the evidence for it. So I found these two studies that were listed in there: effective low intensity millimeter radiation on the gamma resonance spectra of hemoglobin, the absorption spectra of hemoglobin and its derivatives in the visible and near infrared region, resonance Raman spectrum of hemoglobin and cytochrome. I'm going to look at these two as well and see if there's anything about 60 gigahertz mentioned in there. And I think that's where we're going to leave it now, guys. Thank you again to everybody who sent me the book Magnetobiology. You don't have to send it to me anymore. I know some people will probably still send it as they see that video, but I'm going to be using Sci-Hub for now on to try to get free studies, and I recommend you guys do as well. Just look up Sci-Hub and it should pop up, and you can get free studies and access to things that the people in power don't want you to have, because they don't want you to be thinking for yourself, and they want you to have to pay money to get access to knowledge. Imagine that. Lock up the knowledge behind paywalls and then feed people bits and pieces of what you want them to know. And that's what we're dealing with. Alright guys, thank you so much for listening to this video. I really didn't intend for it to be this long, but apparently there was more than I thought to look in that book, Magnetobiology. This is just an early first look at the book. Please read it yourself as well and tell me what you find. One other thing I want to mention that I get a lot of you guys sending me is the CIA's declassified document that is actually a scanned copy of Russian documents when the USSR was studying the effects of millimeter waves and radiation and things of that sort. I have that document, guys. I know a lot of you guys comment to me. I have it. I haven't had a chance to look at every single page. It is a couple hundred pages. And since it's scanned, I can't do what I just did and do a Control F and search for it. So how about you guys, let's do a collaborative research project, and why don't you dive into the CIA declassified document on millimeter waves that comes from the Soviet Union and tell me, do you see anything about 60 gigahertz? Yes, I mean, there's going to be things that are talking about the dangers of millimeter waves, and that's valuable in general in the fight to get the public to question these things. But in regards to you guys claiming things about 60 gigahertz, I'm trying to either debunk it or prove it, and I'm coming close to feeling pretty confident that there's nothing that clearly states that 60 gigahertz is going to cause people to not be able to breathe and is thus related or is COVID-19. Now, the way it is related is because 5G, Wi-Fi, EMFs, all these things are already affecting our immune system, our adrenal glands, our pineal gland, our thyroid, our so many parts of our biology. And so that's already happening, and that could definitely weaken us in addition to exposure to glyphosate, fluoride, chlorine, all kinds of other chemicals and toxins, and can weaken our immune system so that we are more susceptible to something. Whether you call it a virus or whatever you want to call it, you're more susceptible, more likely to get sick if you're exposed to these conditions constantly. So please do research magnetobiology. If you have access to the CIA document that really, is about millimeter waves that came from Russia, then research that too and help me find anything in there about 60 gigahertz if it exists. Because if it is, guys, believe me, I will update my documentary and we'll add in something specific and say, guys, we need to be particularly concerned about 60 gigahertz if indeed there's something special about that part of the frequency that is more dangerous than the other parts. And if not, well then let's stop spreading bad information and let's focus on the things we can prove. Alright guys, that's it for now. This has been Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance Network. Until next time, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.